I'm Paul Baxendale, and welcome to blog post number 9. I'm very grateful that you're here to watch these videos of my old school bodybuilding experiences. Thank you for joining me again this week. This week we're going to go all the way back to one of my very first major victories and the decisions that I took from it, decisions that would very much alter the course of my life. But before we start, let's hear once again from one of the Stoic philosophers, Marcus Aurelius, and listen to what he had to say about peace of mind. How satisfying is it to dismiss and block out any upsetting or foreign impression, and immediately to have peace in all things. Blog post number 9, my first major victory, mistakes, goal setting, and a very important decision. After the Sidmouth show, where Dorian had been the guest poser, I made up my mind that if I wanted to become the very best bodybuilder I could be, then I needed to be around the best. And the best was the beast that had just brought down the house in Sidmouth, the shadow Dorian Yates. At that point, I'd been training for several years seriously, and as a young teenager, to help my other sporting endeavours. As well as a martial artist, I was a county swimmer, a school champion tennis player, a runner, a football and rugby player, as well as a failure in the Rawton and District Amateur Homebrew Association when I was 14 years old, after which I never ever drank alcohol again. And I'd met a few of the greats in the sport, as well as having Johnny Fuller taking me under his wing and was training me in his high volume, high rep training methodology. I loved my sessions with Johnny. They were brutal and intense, and in terms of volume they were crazy. But although I was making gains, and considering I'd been training completely naturally for all these years, I had a feeling that the amount of time I was spending training wasn't producing equal returns in physique development. I had heard and read about Dorian's new, high intensity, low volume training approach, and I must admit that seemed too little in terms of the result he was achieving. However, I'd never up to that point seen him train. Now, being wrong about the style of training is just a learning curve, one we must all go through unless you're fortunate enough to fall upon your perfect method straight away. But never see being wrong as anything negative, as long as you learn by it. If anyone can prove and show to me that I think and act in error, I will gladly change it, for I seek the truth, by which no one has ever been harmed. The one who is harmed is the one who abides in deceit and ignorance. Again, the words of Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor, who had the humility and the wisdom to know that when you're shown to be wrong, be glad of the opportunity to change it, to do right. So my mind was made up. I continued to train with Johnny in his high volume approach 2 or 3 times a week, as well as working with him on the doors of the nightclub 4 nights a week, which allowed me to talk to him all night about training, nutrition, supplementation, stories about him in the States, competing in the Olympia, and how he had adjusted his training after he'd torn his pec. I picked out an early show in 1991, the NABBA South Coast show, as my next goal. I had just at the back end of the prior year done my first ever cycle of anabolics. I'm sure the size of the cycle will shock you, knowing the courses advised by many of the gurus today. Yes, it was huge, a huge course of 200 Dianabol tablets over 6 weeks, with a resulting gain of pretty much 20 pounds of muscle tissue. Let's just say it was impossible for me to say anything but the truth if anybody asked me if I started to take anything. as the results were so extraordinary. My body literally transformed during those 6 weeks in all the right places. It was a truly astonishing change in a very short period of time. But let me put in here a caveat before anyone accuses me of promoting their use. My results were not normal. They were at a time where I had been training for nearly 10 years seriously, and the products at the time were always pharmaceutical grade. I had taken many months of research and of asking the top amateurs and the pros before I felt comfortable making the decision for myself. And even then, in all honesty, I wasn't 100% comfortable in that decision, but the overriding factor was simply, if I was going to compete at the international level with these guys, I really did have to cross over into the dark side. But make sure I did so with the best advice, the minimum amounts, and I had mentors that would be looking after me and a local doctor who would be checking my bloods regularly, all the time, all through the year. Now, there is never a safe way of taking a drug. They all have their side effects, even paracetamol and aspirin. The bottom line was I made my decision and I took the step, and as little and inconsequential as it may appear to some people today with the pharmaceuticals and the amounts that they take today, believe me, it was a massive decision for me. As I've always said, I will always tell you the truth. I will always give you my story straight up, hopefully to stop people going anywhere near anabolics unless they're committed to competing and competing at a fairly high level. No one needs to take anything to look great to go to the beach or go to the club. And even then, they should always do so with full knowledge and acknowledgement of the potential consequences. However small they may be, they always exist. Seriously, I won shows, non-tested shows, where I was competing against guys who were all on the gear. And I was winning those shows, or coming second. I never placed lower than third in any show. Now, I think it was the English Riviera Championships in Torquay one year, where backstage everyone was talking about what they'd been using to prepare for the show. Now, I wasn't a fool, I knew what they were talking about, but I had no idea what the names of these products were or even what they did. In fact, it was one of the reasons I wasn't sure if they really were going to have that much of an effect, because I was beating these guys. Well, after those 200 Dianabol tablets, I suddenly realized that maybe I did have decent genetics for this sport. And so I started to investigate the subject in full research mode. And I approached it with the help of my friend Paul Borison, who was also a bodybuilder at the time, and he was conversing with Dan Duchesne over in the States. I was also talking to other bodybuilders who were using, top amateurs and pros, and I always adopted a very humble mindset when it came to these things, because it's a very serious topic. Throw out your conceited opinions, for it is impossible for a person to begin to learn what he thinks he already knows. My prep into the South Britain was the first time I actually felt as though I had an idea what I was actually doing with my diet. I had no coach, no guru, no trainer. Back then you didn't have any of these things. You just did it all on your own and you learned through trial and error. Looking back, I would guesstimate my diet was probably around 60% carbs, 30% protein and 10% fats. And I gauged the success of the diet by the mirror and the weight scales. I always aimed to lose between 1 or 2 pounds a week, hopefully a pure body fat. And the only way I could check really was by looking at the mirror. That's all we had back then. And it actually worked pretty good. I ended up around 10 pounds heavier than the previous year and substantially leaner. In fact, I was shredded. I always preferred to come in sliced to the bone and give up a few pounds than to come in softer but fuller, because my shape and my symmetry gave me a natural advantage to some degree. In NABBA, they have height classes rather than weight classes, so I had no weight to make. I just had to come in as big and as shredded as possible. Now, I knew I wasn't going to be the biggest guy on stage by a long way. It takes years. I would estimate it was going to take me 10 years to fully fill out my 6'1" frame, to eventually where I would step on stage later on in my career at 118.7 kilograms, peeled to the bone. Now, there were a couple of guys who also competed in our town, so I had some idea of the quality needed and what condition looked like. But it was my very good friend from Newbury, Graham Black, who looked at me once a week and told me if he thought I was on track or not. At 8 weeks out, I was not. At 3 weeks out, he was calling people over to take a look at me. Even though he never said anything to me except, "Keep it going, Paul, keep it going." There was no blowing smoke up your backside in those days. I remember driving up to his gym in Newbury, and he stopped the gym to gather everyone around just to look at me as I posed, and he looked at my condition. But it's funny because at our own gyms, we always trained with full sweats on, baggies, rag tops. We never ever showed what we looked like to anyone. It's funny because these days you see people are putting up contest prep photos literally daily. So there's really very little surprise when it comes to show day as to what these people actually look like. Back then we kept it well hidden, apart from travelling to gyms away from our town where you lived, to ask your trusted mentors whether they thought you were on track or not. Now, Graham was one of my best friends back then. He really encouraged me, he helped and supported me in everything. A wonderful, gentle guy. Rest in peace, Graham. He used to love to show my condition off to other people. He himself was a condition freak, so he loved it when other people were in real condition. I remember we were at the British finals one year where I was competing, and we walked into the reception area, and there was a bunch of ladies there who he knew. They were all competitive bodybuilders themselves. Before I knew it, he'd pulled down my baggies to my ankles, shouting over to them, "Hey, check out Paul's quads, freaking shredded." Now, I was pretty embarrassed at that point, I've got to say, but I was even more embarrassed when one of the ladies ran and jumped right on me, legs and arms around me. I guess that certainly was a very warm reception that day. Great times. Anyway, back to the prep. As the show approached, we never did anything crazy in the last week. We had the mindset, if you looked shredded the week before, why would you change anything? Those days are long gone. But there is some wisdom in those words, as I have seen many people look worse on the day of the show than they did the week before, looking better before they'd adopted major carb depletion and loading principles. Yes, we did drop the carbs the first few days, and we would increase them at the end of the week, but it wasn't anything crazy. It was really just trying to tighten up by eliminating some subcutaneous water. But basically, we aim to be in contest-ready condition 1 week out from the show in terms of body fat, and already have a grainy dryness, which is simply enhanced by our last week's protocols. Learning yourself was a great way to know your own body. I'm constantly amazed by how easily we love ourselves above all others, yet we put more stock in the opinion of others than in our own estimation of self. How much credence we give to the opinion of our peers have of us, and how little to our very own. The day of the show was stressful but a very happy one. I went down to Portsmouth in the morning with my chicken, rice and broccoli and my packet of rice cakes, and I registered. It was then that the head guy from NABBA pulled me to one side and told me I shouldn't be competing there because I was out of area. Now, I'd phoned several weeks beforehand to the show's promoter to ask if I could compete there because it was closer to my home than the formal home area show was. Now he said, of course you can. And he said it was no problem at all. He'd be only too happy for me to compete at his show. However, they did allow me to get on stage and I had a great time. My routine went down really, really well with the audience. And I remember thinking, wow, these people are really enjoying this. Now there were some big guys on that stage next to me, but no one else was really dialed in. And I won. I won first place and an invite to the British finals later on that year. And it was beyond my wildest dreams for that show. The only downside was the attitude of the chief nabber guy who sadly took my trophy off me. And he said, although I'd won, he couldn't give me the trophy because I was out of area. Now it didn't bother me. I wasn't a trophy collector, so it didn't bother me at all. But I did wonder what reaction I might receive at the British finals. If he was that upset with me then, my first introduction to bodybuilding politics, I guess. But it didn't really bother me as I had much bigger things on my radar than a tin pot trophy that probably cost a $5 down the town. And the audience's reaction and reception more than made up for it. I was overwhelmed by the response I got leaving the contest venue with people congratulating me on my routine and my condition and my aesthetics. Now that made me feel as I was on the right lines and heading in the right direction. The only thing that was niggling me at the back of my mind was, how was I going to get the size on me where I'd be able to compete against the really top guys? I was prepared to work, prepared to take years, and prepared to do anything to learn from the best. So I made myself a plan. I had about 4 months until the British finals in Blackpool. So I just came out of condition a little bit. I kept tight and I kept my diet clean. And I trained my heart and soul out. Still with the high volume, high rep, high set approach I learned from Johnny. And my cardio had been a 40-minute power walk in the morning before breakfast, and then another 30 minutes on the stationary bike post-workout, while I sipped on my thick protein shake. When I say sipped, I mean I actually used a spoon and ate that protein drink like it was a dessert or something. Back then all we had was casein, caseinate, or egg protein and milk proteins. Whey hadn't even been on the market at that point. Now my gym would blend up a shake in water for me, very, very thick, for me to have while I was on the bike, and they would give me a spoon to eat it with too. With 2 scoops of calcium caseinate in water, add a high-powered blender. It meant it. Tasted and felt like I was eating a dessert rather than a shake. And did I look forward to that shake? It was the only sweetness I would eat all day, except one banana, which I had with my midday meal with a jacket potato and chicken breasts. Now I do remember as I started dieting down for the Britain, I was coming in very quickly. So I allowed myself an apple after my morning's cardio on the way to work. I can still taste the sweetness of those apples. It's amazing how your taste buds change with years of changed eating habits. Now memory's a funny thing, isn't it? Just thinking about that apple on my way to work now, I can literally see and taste in my mind as I walked along in my suit going to work. Every last tiny little bite I took from that apple. People used to wonder why I was so happy first thing in the morning in the office back then. Little did they know it was all down to an apple. Now the Britain was a whole new ball game. This was the big league, the big boys league. And I knew that I still didn't have the muscle size to go toe to toe with those guys. But my only hope was to come in freaky shredded. So sick that people couldn't not look at my physique, because every time I moved, there'd be so much going on in my body. Fibers would be splitting everywhere. Now it was during this time that I was good friends with Paul Borison. who was still working at the recruitment business that he worked at before moving into sales and then into bodybuilding supplements. And for the first time ever, I let someone else give me advice in how to peak for a show. And it would then be the last time too, except for little tidbits from Dorian and from Kerry. It was very nearly a disaster. Now, Paul was good friends and communicated with Dan Duchesne at the time, frequently over this very new thing called the internet, something I never had back then. And he had all sorts of new cutting edge advantages and protocols that he reckoned that he'd get me so dry I would look like I was carved out of granite. Now, Paul was a great salesman, a lovely guy, and had a heart of gold, but unfortunately believed a lot of his own ideas, even though he hadn't actually tried them himself. Although, to be fair, he did try a good few crazy things on himself too. Now, we were our own lab experiments back then. If we researched an idea or a product or a protocol, we would try it on ourselves. Now, that's not something I would recommend for anyone to do today. I was ready 2 days out. I looked in the mirror and I even freaked myself out. I remember showing my legs to my mother and she almost screamed in horror. It was so appalling, disgusting, she said. I guessed I was ready. But then Paul came over and he looked me over and he said, yeah, he said, you're ready, absolutely ready. My body parts were feathered, cross striations everywhere. I couldn't even sit on the bike anymore. I had no fat on my backside in which to sit on the bike. It was so painful to sit there. I had to change my evening cardio to a power walk up the hills in my village, in rain and in sun. Now, I always remember it being sunny, but I'm sure that it's just selective memory. I certainly got soaked through a few times, having to shower, dry off, warm up, and then get dressed for work, all before 7 in the morning or later on in the evening. Now, getting up in the mornings was no problem for me. Those 4 a.m. wake-ups were easy. Plus, I could never sleep during a contest prep. I think my metabolism was running so fast, it just wouldn't let me sleep. Plus, I was so hungry. The only trouble was come 11 o'clock in the morning, I would find myself falling asleep at work. And where I worked was right by a window. So if it was a sunny day, I would be fighting, not always successfully, the urge to close my eyes until lunchtime when I would wake up properly. But it's exactly those times that you show people your true character. They know you're tired. So try even harder to be a better man or a better woman every minute of the day. At those times, you have many other qualities you can't claim to have been deprived of at birth. Display then those qualities in your own power, honesty, dignity, endurance, chastity, contentment, frugality, kindness, freedom, persistence, avoiding gossip, and magnanimity. I either trained at lunchtime or in the afternoon straight from work. So midday, my mind was beginning to focus on the workout and what I was going to do that day. It was a counting game, counting the days down to the final. Now, my routine was very basic and just involved a lot of volume, sets and reps, chins, rows, deadlifts and cable pull downs for back, presses with a barbell, dumbbells, flies with dumbbells, pec deck for chest, curls with dumbbells, barbells and preacher for bicep, push downs, dips, close grip bench for triceps, squats, leg press, leg extensions, hamstring curls, stiff leg deadlifts, calf raises for legs, just all the basic movements, nearly all done with free weights, with a bare minimum done on machines. Now, the machines back then were all made by a local guy, a bodybuilder, an engineer, a gentleman called Roy Bunce. Now, he was a good bodybuilder, but the machines, although they were basic and they didn't run particularly smoothly, not like the machines of today, I would always prefer to use a free weight movement over any machine anyway. But still, Roy's machines worked, and they worked really well. He made a great T-bar row. In fact, he made a whole range of gym equipment. He turned the upstairs of his workshop into his showroom gym, and he would often invite me over for a workout upstairs where no one would bother me. I know he had a few of us competitive bodybuilders popping in for sessions in his workshop. He was a very generous guy, great guy, very funny, and had one of those enormous Reg Park type of chests. You know, the huge ribbed barrel chested type that Mike Katz had also? It's not so common today. I think it was partly genetic and partly basic heavy movements, which cut out those slabs of meat on top of his ginormous rib cage. Anyway, back to Paul's advices. Suffice to say, he suggested a protocol I'd never used before, and one I knew very little about. To be honest, I knew nothing about. However, I was tempted because I wanted that freaky dryness so badly. The crazy thing was I was already freaky dry, with hindsight. The weakest a bodybuilder's mind will ever be is the week before a show. Why do you think all these gurus approach athletes backstage or close to a show, promising them that if they were with them, oh, you'd win this and you'd win that? Because they know any bodybuilder is vulnerable at this time. Now, I quickly learned how to stay away from everyone the last week and do my own thing, as I was hesitating and umming and ahhing when Paul said, "Don't worry about a thing, I'll come up with you and make sure you're okay, and I'll even do the protocol for you so you don't have to do it." Very generous, but big mistake. The day of the show, I was fine. I felt as good as anyone can feel if you're at 3% body fat, dehydrated, overtrained and exhausted, and having spent the last 12 weeks training, cardio, dieting, posing, tanning, and basically pushing your body to its limits. I had friends, family, and gym members come to watch me, and I felt that I was in the best shape of my life thus far. And looking back, I was lacking in terms of muscular development, but I had a nice shape, great conditioning, and a good routine. However, on stripping down in the pump-up room, the head nabber guy at the time came up to me and said, so you're the guy who competed out of his area show, are you? I knew then it wasn't going to be my day, I suppose. No top 6 for me, not that day, sadly. Still, I got great feedback, and especially from my peers, top guys, which made me feel at least I belonged at that level, despite a low top 10 placing. I was happy, but determined that never again would I be subject to the whims and the politics of an insecure person or organisation. Now, I know things have changed since those days, so it's no reflection on today's organisation. To do so, I would have to ensure that there was no possible chance that anyone could use any excuse to mark me down. I was going to have to come in so dominant, so good, that they could not ignore me and they could not overlook me. And for that, I knew I had to implement the plan I had devised to get me to the next level and beyond. I needed to be around Dorian Yates. And if there was any possibility, to train with him. The question was how to do so. In fact, it was Dorian who gave me some advice later on about how to react to a bad call or by politics by the judges. He simply said, be so damn good that they can't ignore you. Well, that was exactly what I was going to do. That evening, while I celebrated with my girlfriend, friends, and her family, and then returned to her mother's house near Telford, which was near Birmingham, the following day to rest and chill out and recover, I also had something else in mind, to visit Temple Gym. However, that night, the new protocol that Paul had helped me use really hit home. Now, I didn't cramp, I didn't feel ill, but I slept for 24 hours solid. I was dehydrated severely. I was drifting in and out of consciousness during the following day and just falling back into sleep after being given some rehydration formula to ensure, even though I was sleeping, my body was slowly recovering. When I finally awoke, I couldn't believe it was 24 hours later. Never again would I take advice from anyone but someone I trusted implicitly and who I knew did things the way I wanted to do things. Old school and safe. That day, I decided to write down my plan of action to take me to the next level. I visualized in crystal clarity exactly how I wanted my body to look, and I committed myself that I would dedicate and I would take whatever it took to get there. The work, the sacrifice, the emotional sacrifices, the financial sacrifices, the forsaking of instant gratification for a long-term goal. I had a must to have. It was time to leave the past behind and focus on my future, on where I knew I had to give everything I had, but also try and maintain some semblance of balance in my relationships and my work. But my main focus was on improvement, a big improvement. Leave the past behind. Let the grand design take care of the future, and instead only rightly guide the present to reverence and justice. Reverence so that you'll love what you've been allotted, for nature brought you both to each other. Justice so that you'll speak the truth freely and without evasion, and so that you'll act only as the law and the value of things require. The next step was to go along to Temple Gym and try and meet the man who had just become Mr. Olympia, the shadow Dorian Yates. And so I drove down to Birmingham the very next day. At the time I knew he usually trained in the hope that he would be there. What I was going to do if he was there, I wasn't exactly sure, but going there I was. And that episode, friends, you've already heard in a previous blog post. Now, before I leave you this week, I think it's time to present the scene with regards to my own personal life during this time. As I said during my extra post series on relationships, I've never been one to enter into short-term, meaningless relationships, never a one-night stand. And for you young guys out there, and the guys on the gear with 4 or 5 times the amount of normal testosterone flowing through your blood, yes, I do understand that during cycles and just naturally sometimes, your hormones can have a powerful impact on what you feel like doing, as opposed to what you know you should or should not be doing. Now, my answer, as it was to my own experiences of feeling that way, where even small land mammals start looking good. Now, I'm only joking, but truly I know how difficult it can be not to follow what everyone else is doing, or to just go ahead because, well, you're 2 consenting adults. No. These are exactly the times that tells you and everyone around you what type of a boy or a man you are. Are you at the mercy of your emotions, or does your reason and your commitment to your character, instead of being pulled towards base emotions, instead keep you grounded and form in your standing of being that noble, virtuous, honest man of high integrity that you know will be the difference of you achieving your purpose or in failing in the deeds of countless unnameable men throughout history who have never achieved their true life's purpose because they were a slave to their emotions. Remember, the greatest of Roman emperors, Marcus Aurelius, the man who could have had every temptation, his whim's desire, but instead he chose to live a frugal life, serving his fellow men and women of Rome to ensure that his name echoed through eternity for the righteous, virtuous, honest, noble and great man that he was. The only difference is that he chose to live nobly, to choose reason over emotion, and to choose greatness instead of choosing ordinary. As Aurelius himself said, remember that your ruling reason becomes unconquerable when it rallies and relies on itself, so that it won't do anything contrary to its own will, even if its position is irrational. Therefore, the mind freed from passions is an impenetrable fortress. A person has no more secure place of refuge for all time. Now, I've made mistakes, but never with anything but kindness within my heart, never without thinking I was trying to help someone. But as I said in the relationships video, there is no use in trying to become a white knight if it only causes your own death by the flames of your own dragon. But do everything you can to remain virtuous and noble, and people will remember you. Be a man, be a woman of integrity, and again, your name will be remembered when others are mere dust and bones. Go out and pursue your purpose, but never lose sight of your ruling principle, your reason. In a future post, I will tell the story of how I met, got to know, and then became betrothed to my wife of over 25 years. It's a tale of a real relationship with its highs and its lows, but ultimately one of togetherness and with plenty of mistakes and a few lessons in there, lots of growing, traveling the world, and of someone who was prepared to follow me, no matter where I felt my purpose was taking me. It may give you hope yet. Hopefully, it may help you in working out some places where not to go wrong, and also some ideas where you can go right as well. Friends, I hope that you've enjoyed another tale of my bodybuilding past. Until next week, stay strong, get stronger, get smarter, get better, and do it all with integrity, honesty, and virtue, and you will find life reaps its rewards your way. Struggle and misfortune are part of life and can hit you when you've done nothing wrong. Life is malevolent, just like that at times. It is the light and the dark, but as long as you have those 3 reps up your sleeve, then you will grow, you will surpass the hurdles, and you will become greater. So always remember and always get those 3 more reps that are inside of you. Always. 3 more reps, lad. 3 more reps, lass. Get them. Thanks very much for listening. It's been my pleasure. I'll see you next week. Goodbye.